Have you ever been the new kid in school, walking into a place where every eye seems to scrutinize you, where the whispers don't stop, and you're just trying to fit in? Imagine all that, but throw in the fact that you're not just new, you're different. That's exactly what Maya Johnson, a quiet black girl from Chicago, faced when she stepped into Brooklyn High for the first time. You see, the world loves to put labels on people, and Maya's label was already written for her before she even set foot in the hallways. A transfer student, a black girl, out of place. But what her peers didn't know was that the silence she wore wasn't a sign of weakness, but of control. They underestimated her in every way, and that mistake would soon change their lives forever. Maya had been to many schools before. She knew how it felt to be the outsider, and this wasn't her first rodeo. She stepped off the yellow bus with her shoulders squared, but her heart pounded in her chest. She had made a vow this year. She was going to make it through without attracting attention. She didn't need friends or enemies. She just needed to survive this last year before graduation. As she walked through the school's crowded hallways, Maya instinctively avoided eye contact. Her grip on her backpack tightened as she navigated through the sea of students. They whispered, their eyes lingering a little too long on her. But she kept her head down. Brooklyn High had its unspoken rules that Maya had learned to live by. Don't stand out, don't react, don't make waves. But not everyone follows the rules. And that's where Maya's story starts to shift. Maya's quiet rival didn't go unnoticed. Among the sea of students, one girl stood out like a crown above the rest. Ashley Mitchell. Tall, blonde, and flawless. The type of girl who could command the attention of the entire room just by walking in. Ashley had power. And at Brooklyn High, power was everything. Her gaze landed on Maya, the quiet new girl. Ashley's eyes narrowed, a cold smile spreading across her face as she assessed the stranger. She saw Maya's silence as an invitation to challenge her. Ashley didn't see Maya as a person. She saw her as a game, an opportunity to reinforce her dominance. Maya was a perfect target, quiet, different, and, most importantly, she didn't respond. This girl's silence is a challenge. She thinks she's above me. Ashley's reputation at Brooklyn High had been built on the ability to control her surroundings, and Maya's disinterest had already planted the seeds of animosity. The game had begun. What Ashley didn't know was that Maya had faced much worse than the petty power plays of high school. Her entire life had been one long lesson in how to stay calm in the face of adversity. She had learned how to hold her ground, how to remain silent when the world expected her to break, and how to never let her emotions get the better of her. Maya was not a victim. She was a fighter, though no one knew it yet. Maya didn't want to make a scene. She didn't want to be the center of attention. But Ashley's relentless whispers and pointed stares made it clear that she had no intention of letting Maya simply exist in peace. It started small, just a few whispers, a few snickers here and there. Does she even know how to dress? Where did she even come from? But Maya, as she had learned in her many years of moving from school to school, didn't respond. She couldn't. If she did, it would only give Ashley and her friends the satisfaction they craved. So, she kept her head down, choosing to endure rather than react. But Ashley wasn't satisfied with that. The silence wasn't the reaction she wanted. To Ashley, silence was weak. Silence was an invitation to push further, and push she would. As the day wore on, Maya could feel the weight of the stares, the whispers, the subtle jabs, but she remained still. She remained calm. She had dealt with this before. She would deal with it again. The battle lines are drawn. By the time lunch came round, Maya was beginning to feel the pressure. She sat at a corner table in the cafeteria, as far away from the chaos as she could. She just wanted to eat in peace. But it wasn't going to be that simple. Ashley's eyes locked onto Maya's secluded spot, and with a glance, she signaled to her loyal followers. Brianna and Courtney, her best friends, stood up and made their way over to Maya's table. They weren't just going to make fun of her behind her back anymore. They wanted to break her, humiliate her in front of the entire school. Ashley was ready for her performance, ready to see Maya crack under pressure. But what Ashley didn't anticipate was that Maya wasn't afraid of her. She wasn't afraid of anyone. Maya's composure was unnerving. Ashley had bullied enough people to know that when you mock someone, you get a reaction. You get anger, embarrassment, or fear. But Maya, she didn't flinch. She didn't react. And that was a problem for Ashley. Maya knew that if she gave Ashley the satisfaction of a reaction, she would lose control. And that was something she couldn't afford. Her father had taught her better. Strength wasn't about fighting back with fists. It was about maintaining control over yourself, no matter what the world threw at you. As Ashley approached, Maya's heart didn't race. Her palms didn't sweat. Her mind didn't falter. She was ready for whatever was coming, but she wasn't going to make the first move. Not yet. You know that moment when you've been underestimated for so long that you begin to wonder if people will ever realize who you truly are. Maya had been quietly enduring Ashley's taunts and bullying. But every glance, every word, every act of humiliation only pushed her closer to a breaking point. The silence that had protected her for so long would soon be the very thing that would turn the tables. After the cafeteria incident, Ashley was more determined than ever to break Maya. The usual subtle jabs weren't enough. Maya's calm, almost unnerving silence only fueled Ashley's need to prove herself. She couldn't stand it. Maya wasn't scared. She wasn't reacting. Ashley had made it her mission to break the new girl, and she wasn't going to stop until Maya snapped. Ashley, with her friends Brianna and Courtney, began to escalate things. She made sure to sit next to Maya in class, whispering insults and making loud comments about Maya's background, her appearance, her clothes. Every word was a calculated attempt to make Maya react. Every laugh, every whisper was a performance for Ashley to prove her dominance. But Maya remained unmoved. Maya, despite everything, was struggling internally. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to fight. But the pressure was mounting, and it was getting harder to maintain her composure. She had been through this before, but this time, it was different. This wasn't just some high school drama. Ashley's relentless bullying was pushing Maya to her limits. And yet, Maya didn't want to give in. She had promised herself that she wouldn't let her emotions control her. She remembered her father's teachings from the gym discipline. Control, patience. Every day she fought this internal battle, trying not to let Ashley win. But it was getting harder. Then, it happened. The next big challenge came during gym class. Ashley, with her brother Zach, the star football player, and Luke, the troublemaker, decided to make Maya the target once again. The school was buzzing with excitement, as gym class was always a spectacle. This time, though, it wasn't about showing off athleticism. It was about showing power. Zach and Luke made sure to bump into Maya, deliberately disrupting her during the warm-up. They were testing her, trying to provoke a reaction. Every bump, every step, was a challenge. But Maya, she refused to react. She stayed calm, focused on her path, refusing to let them have the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. But Ashley wasn't finished. She wanted more. At lunch, everything came to a head. Ashley, tired of waiting for Maya to crack, decided to make her move. With her usual smug smile, she approached Maya's table. The cafeteria was full of students, all watching, waiting for the next act in Ashley's performance. Ashley feigned an accidental bump, spilling her juice on Maya's tray once again. This time, Maya didn't just walk away calmly. No, something in her shifted. Her eyes locked with Ashley's, and for the first time, she wasn't just enduring. She wasn't just silent. She was taking control of the situation. Maya picked up her tray, her movements precise and deliberate. The room fell silent as she calmly walked to the trash bin, throwing away the spilled food. There was no reaction of anger, no tears, no fear, just complete control. And in that moment, everything changed. The room was no longer watching Ashley. They were watching Maya. What Maya had done wasn't just about throwing away a tray of food, it was a declaration. She was showing Ashley and everyone else in the cafeteria that she was no longer the passive target. She wasn't afraid of Ashley's power anymore. She had taken control of the situation, and by doing so, she had shifted the entire power dynamic. Ashley, who had always been in control, now stood frozen, unable to understand what had just happened. Maya hadn't broken. She hadn't reacted, and that was the scariest thing of all. For the first time, Ashley felt something she hadn't felt before. Unease. She couldn't figure out what was going on with Maya. How could she stay so calm? How could she not react? This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be the one who controlled everything, who intimidated people into submission. But Maya was different. This realization was like a crack in Ashley's armor. She began to question everything she had built her identity on. Was she really as powerful as she thought? Could someone like Maya truly challenge her? As the days passed, the tension between Maya and Ashley continued to rise. The students around them noticed the shift, the change in power. No one had seen Maya like this before. She wasn't just the quiet, new girl. She was someone with strength that wasn't based on violence or aggression, but on discipline, control, and self-respect. Ashley, on the other hand, was unraveling. Her reputation, once built on fear and intimidation, was slowly crumbling. Every time she tried to reassert her dominance over Maya, the silence from the black girl only made her feel more uncertain. But neither of them knew that the final confrontation was coming. Maya had taken control of her life, and the moment had come for her to stop being the passive observer in her own story. The only question left was how far Ashley was willing to push her before Maya finally took action. There comes a moment in every battle where the silence no longer serves as a shield. For Maya Johnson, that moment had arrived. She had endured the bullying, the whispers, the humiliation. But now, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about standing up for herself, taking back her power, and showing everyone who thought she was weak that she wasn't afraid to fight for her dignity. Ashley Mitchell had always prided herself on control. She had bullied, mucked, and humiliated her way to the top of the social hierarchy at Brooklyn High. And now, with Maya still refusing to break, Ashley decided it was time for the final act. She wanted to prove to everyone, especially Maya, that she was the one in control. Ashley, with her loyal group of friends, decided to escalate the bullying even further. This time, she wasn't going to rely on subtle insults or whispers. She wanted to make a scene, to humiliate Maya in front of the entire school. She had already pushed Maya to her limits, but this time, it was going to be different. The challenge came in the form of a note taped to Maya's locker after school. It was simple but clear: meet me behind the gym, or be called a coward forever. Maya read the note in silence, her face calm. She didn't want to fight, didn't want to engage in this toxic power struggle, but she knew that Ashley wasn't going to stop. She had pushed Maya far enough, and now there was only one way to end it. Maya knew this wasn't just about a personal rivalry. This was about respect. It was about taking control of her own life and not letting anyone, especially someone like Ashley, dictate her worth. Maya had been trained in martial arts by her father since she was young. She knew how to defend herself not out of aggression, but out of necessity. But this wasn't about fighting. This was about standing up for what she believed in. She wasn't going to let Ashley's words and actions make her feel small anymore. As Maya walked toward the gym, the weight of the moment settled in. She didn't know what to expect. Would Ashley bring her friends? Would she try to physically confront her? The thoughts didn't matter. What mattered was that Maya was ready. Behind the gym, the tension was palpable. A small crowd of students had gathered, waiting for the showdown. Ashley stood at the center of the circle, her friends by her side, her eyes fixed on Maya with a smug expression. She had every intention of showing the entire school that she was still the one in control. But as Maya stepped into the circle, her presence was different. There was no fear in her eyes, no anger, just a quiet, unwavering strength. The students watching couldn't help but notice the difference. Maya wasn't the same girl they had seen quietly enduring. She had grown. Ashley stepped forward, ready to provoke her. "I thought you'd run away like the scared little mouse you are," she taunted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But Maya didn't flinch. She stood there, her gaze locked with Ashley's, her body calm and poised. Ashley's taunts didn't faze Maya. She wasn't going to play into Ashley's game. Instead, Maya's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, she spoke with a quiet confidence. "You chose this fight," Maya said softly, "and now you'll regret it." With those words, Ashley's smug expression faltered. She didn't know how to react. For the first time, she wasn't in control. Then, the tension broke. Ashley, fueled by pride and anger, rushed at Maya. She made the first move, pushing Maya in an attempt to knock her off balance. But Maya was prepared. In one swift motion, she sidestepped Ashley's attack, using her martial arts training to twist Ashley's arm and send her crushing to the ground. The crowd gasped, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Ashley Mitchell, the queen of Brooklyn High, had been taken down in a single move by the quiet, reserved new girl. But Maya wasn't finished. Luke, one of Ashley's loyal followers, rushed at her next, determined to restore Ashley's honor. But Maya was ready again. She grabbed Luke's arm, twisting it behind his back until he was forced to kneel, unable to resist. The crowd was silent now, watching as Maya stood over them, calm and composed, her gaze unshaken. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't let her anger take over. She had simply taken control of the situation, ended it with precision, and made sure that no one would ever underestimate her again. Ashley, still lying on the ground, looked up at Maya with a mix of disbelief and humiliation. The crowd had seen it all. The girl who had once ruled Brooklyn High with her cruelty and arrogance was now nothing more than a defeated mess on the ground. Maya's quiet confidence had completely shattered Ashley's perception of herself. For the first time in her life, Ashley wasn't the one with all the answers. She wasn't the one in control, and that realization left her feeling small, helpless, and alone. As Maya walked away from the gym, the crowd slowly began to disperse. The whispers were no longer about Maya being the target, the new girl who didn't belong. They were about her strength, her resolve, and the message she had sent to everyone. True power doesn't come from dominating others. It comes from controlling yourself. Ashley, meanwhile, stood there, trembling, her friends avoiding her gaze. The power she had once held so firmly was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The next day at school, everything had changed. Maya was no longer just the quiet girl. She had earned the respect of the students around her, and even those who had once supported Ashley began to look at her with new eyes. Maya wasn't the victim anymore. She was the one in control, and she had shown that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to stand up for yourself when everyone else expects you to fall. The following day, the atmosphere at Brooklyn High was nothing like it had been before. The whispers in the hallways were no longer about Maya's strange composure or her quiet resistance to Ashley's power. They were now filled with respect, admiration, and even awe. Maya had done what many people couldn't even imagine doing. She had taken back her power without a single word of violence. Just sheer control and willpower. Maya wasn't interested in being the center of attention. She wasn't interested in basking in the glory of her victory over Ashley. But what she couldn't ignore were the looks of admiration that followed her as she walked through the hallways. No longer was she the outsider, the girl who didn't fit in. Now, she was someone different, someone who had earned the respect of her peers, not through intimidation, but through strength of character. The students who had once ignored her now nodded respectfully as she passed by. They had witnessed something truly remarkable the day before, and they knew that Maya had changed the entire dynamic of the school. The power that Ashley had wielded for so long had crumbled, and Maya, in her silence, had taken its place. On the other hand, Ashley Mitchell walked through the school with her head down, her once powerful position now shattered. No one spoke to her. No one looked at her with fear or admiration anymore. She had been defeated, not by force, but by a quiet and unshakable strength that had dismantled her fragile empire. She could feel the change in the air. The students who used to follow her now whispered behind her back, their conversations laced with pity and disappointment. Brianna and Courtney, her once loyal friends, now avoided her gaze, too afraid to speak up in her defense. Even Zach, the popular football star, stood at a distance, unwilling to offer his support. Ashley was isolated, and the weight of her defeat pressed down on her like a heavy burden. Maya, however, didn't let any of this go to her head. She knew the danger of letting success or failure define her. She was content to continue on her path, to focus on her goals, and to finish her senior year with the same quiet grace that had gotten her through so many difficult situations. She had proven something far more important than just physical strength. She had shown that true power comes from within. As the days went by, Maya continued to show the same calm, collected demeanor, and her reputation grew. It wasn't just about the fight behind the gym, it was about the way she carried herself, the way she responded to every situation with the same level-headed strength. Students began to approach her with questions about her martial arts training, asking how she remained so calm under pressure. They saw in her something they hadn't seen before, the ability to stand firm without ever needing to raise a fist. For Ashley, the situation was becoming unbearable. She couldn't escape the whispers, the stares, and the shame that clung to her every step. She had always been the queen of Brooklyn High, but now she was a shadow of the person she used to be. She had tried to regain her power, to strike back at Maya, but every attempt only deepened her humiliation. The worst part was that she couldn't even talk to Brianna or Courtney. They had distanced themselves from her, unsure of how to react to the new dynamic. They, too, had begun to realize that the power they had followed for so long had been built on fear and false pretenses. Ashley now found herself questioning everything she had ever believed about herself. What good was power if it was built on bullying and control? What had she truly gained by trying to break others? Maya, meanwhile, kept her head down and focused on her studies. She didn't need validation from others. She had learned long ago that true strength wasn't about forcing people to respect you, it was about earning their respect by staying true to who you are. And that's exactly what she had done. In the end, Maya didn't need to prove anything more to anyone. She had already shown them the most important lesson. True power doesn't come from intimidation, fear, or domination. It comes from within. It comes from the ability to control yourself, to stay grounded, and to rise above the noise of the world around you. The students of Brooklyn High now watched as Ashley Mitchell walked the halls alone. Once, they had admired her, feared her, and respected her. Now, they simply watched as she passed by, some with pity, others with indifference. Ashley had been dethroned, not because of Maya's actions, but because Maya had shown her that the power Ashley had relied on was fragile, built on the wrong foundation. Ashley's confidence had been her greatest weapon, but it had been shattered by the one thing she couldn't control, Maya's unwavering strength. And as she walked alone through the halls, she couldn't help but realize that maybe, just maybe, she was no longer the person she thought she was. Maya's life went on quietly after that. The school returned to a new normal, where students began to rethink the old hierarchies that had once defined Brooklyn High. Maya had started a ripple effect, and though she wasn't the one to claim the title of queen, she was undeniably the one who had changed everything. Students no longer followed power out of fear, they followed it out of respect, and Maya, in her quiet way, had shown them what true power looked like. It wasn't about making people bend to your will, it was about standing firm and unyielding in your beliefs, no matter the cost. The days following the confrontation behind the gym marked the beginning of something new, not just for Maya, but for the entire school. The power structure had shifted, and while Maya hadn't asked for it, she had become a symbol, not of strength through dominance, but of power through self-control, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to standing up for herself. The quiet, unassuming girl had shown the entire school that true power didn't come from tearing others down. It came from lifting yourself up, no matter the pressure. Maya's victory wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. And as time passed, the school began to realize that they had witnessed something much bigger than just a fight between two girls. They had witnessed the breakdown of false power and the rise of genuine strength. Maya's influence began to ripple through Brooklyn High in ways she never anticipated. It wasn't just the students who had seen her calmly take control of the situation. It was everyone who had been silently watching from the sidelines. The quiet ones, the ones who had always felt powerless, now began to find their voices. The whispers that had once been about Maya's strangeness turned into discussions about her strength and character. In the weeks that followed, Maya found herself approached by several students, those who had once ignored her, those who had watched the drama unfold from a distance. They wanted to know how she had kept her composure in the face of such cruelty. They wanted to know how she had turned the tables without raising her fist. They wanted to learn from her. Maya didn't have an answer for them at first. She had never thought of herself as a leader. She had simply acted in the moment, doing what felt right. But as she reflected, she realized something. This was my moment, and now I'm meant to share it. Meanwhile, Ashley's world continued to unravel. The more time passed, the more she realized just how fragile her hold on power had been. She had always relied on her popularity, her friends, her money, and her beauty to keep people in line. But none of those things had protected her from the inevitable truth that Maya had revealed. Ashley began to spend more time alone. She no longer entered the cafeteria with a group of followers. She ate in silence, feeling the weight of the stares and whispers that still lingered. Her former friends, Brianna and Courtney, no longer sat beside her. They had distanced themselves, unsure of where they stood, unsure of how to react to Ashley's crumbling image. One afternoon, after a particularly lonely lunch, Ashley sat in the courtyard, her gaze fixed on the empty space around her. She could hear the whispers of the students, but this time, they weren't directed at her with fear. They were filled with pity. She could feel the shift. She was no longer the queen of the school, she was the outcast. But there was something else happening in Ashley. Despite the shame, despite the fear and regret, there was a realization. Maya had been right. All this time, she had been chasing something that wasn't real. She had built her reputation on fear. And fear only lasts as long as the person wielding it. But Maya, with her calm strength, had shown Ashley that true power isn't about being feared. It's about being respected, being true to yourself, and standing firm in your values. That realization wasn't easy to accept, but it was the first step toward change. Ashley knew she couldn't just go back to her old ways. She couldn't continue trying to dominate others in the same way she had before. She had to rebuild, but this time, it had to be different. Maya, on the other hand, continued her journey in silence, focusing on what truly mattered to her studies, her future, and the quiet sense of peace that had come with embracing her true strength. The school had changed. Brooklyn High wasn't the same place it had been when she first arrived, and neither were the students. The air was lighter, the whispers softer, and the stares more respectful. Maya didn't seek recognition, but it was undeniable. She had become a symbol of inner strength, a living example that true power doesn't come from external sources, it comes from the self. Her peers, her teachers, and even the students who once bullied her began to view her with new eyes. They saw her not as the quiet girl from Chicago, but as someone who had stood up for herself and, in doing so, had changed their world. Over time, the power structure at Brooklyn High continued to shift. The bullying, once an accepted part of the school's culture, began to diminish. Students who had been bullied found their voices, while others who had been too afraid to speak out began to support their peers. The focus shifted from tearing people down to building them up. Maya's story became a lesson for everyone, students and teachers alike, that real strength comes from within. It's not about making others feel small to feel big. It's about lifting others up while lifting yourself. And that lesson, though simple, was one that would resonate in the halls of Brooklyn High for years to come. By the end of the year, Ashley had changed. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but she had started to reflect on her actions and the impact they had on others. She began to approach people differently, less with the arrogance she once held, and more with humility. She no longer tried to maintain control over her peers. Instead, she focused on rebuilding genuine relationships. She wasn't the same Ashley Mitchell who had ruled Brooklyn High with fear and power, but in that change, she had found something she never thought she would: peace. Maya's legacy wasn't about being the strongest person in the room. It was about being the most authentic, the most true to herself. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She had already shown that the greatest power comes from self-control, resilience, and the ability to remain calm in the face of adversity. And as she walked across the graduation stage, surrounded by a new generation of students who had learned from her example, Maya knew one thing for sure: Brooklyn High had changed, and so had she.